My name is Austin Sapien, and I currently live in Brooklyn, New York, but I grew up in Maine, and I've lived in all four corners of the country. I was born in Texas, grew up in Maine, lived in Portland and Seattle, and now I'm in New York. Yeah, I think early on, I wasn't quite as growing up in the middle of nowhere, I wasn't very aware of the art world per se, and I just grew up mostly my dad and I had this running joke: if we ever saw an infomercial, we'd be like, oh, that's stupid, we could just make that. So I just grew up making things with my dad in the basement. And then sort of college time, I sort of discovered the art world. I went to Brooklyn, and because I was living in Seattle and Portland, and then I moved to Brooklyn to go to Pratt, and then I've been living in Brooklyn ever since. I used to make sort of junk metal and scrap wood figures that had their hands, feet, and head were clay. So I sort of was juxtaposing meticulous hand sculpting, semi-anatomically correct, I'd sometimes abstract it. But now I've been getting into paper mache. I think juxtaposing the softness of the paper mache and the metal is sort of a contrast that sort of goes beyond anything that I've done before. The clay is a nice contrast to the metal, but it's also still a hard, heavy material. But this is just such a contrast to the softness and the metal, and I have a little more freedom of durability with the paper mache, which is ironic because it's softer, but it's much less brittle. I'll sort of focus in on one medium, whether it's welding, clay, or drawing, or paper mache, but then I always want to bring it together, and I enjoy bringing together sort of materials and elements that don't really want to coalesce. You can't weld clay to metal, so how do you join them? How do you enact a relationship between them? Same with the paper mache. A lot of the faces that I make turn out to look like people that I'm around frequently, and it's not even intentional. So I think process first, and then little tiny images and visions pop into my head. For a very basic example, the rib cage on that. I was gonna try and just make sort of a normal rib cage, but then I was just reminded of my drawings and how how I placed the rib cage is more like how I placed the lines in my drawings. And so there's always little things that I see amidst the process, but first and foremost, my hands are definitely leading the way. Utica, it's got its quirks. I think it's very interesting how sort of spread out it is, but how few people there seem to be at times, and then you go out at the right time, then there's all of a sudden you see everyone. I think also small towns like this, I think it was surprising when we went out to eat, the food was pretty good, pretty much anywhere we went. I think it's good for something like this where you want to come and focus on things and focus on making work. I think the size of the cohort is really good, and integrating yourself into a group is always difficult, but the size of this group I think is really key. It's just hard to find a cohort that not only is good at what they're doing, but is self-directed and self-motivated and actually truly passionate about that. To have every single one of us all the way there feels amazing. Yeah. 2 months is a really good period of time. I wouldn't necessarily want it any longer right now. I think it's gonna be good for, like I said, getting my momentum going again. And I also just got my studio integrated into my apartment, which is, amazing. It's funny how that's how momentum works, right? I had my studio out an hour away, never went, and now that it was in my studio or my apartment, I still wasn't making because I had no momentum. So now I'm hoping that with this I can go back and do a little bit after work, do a bunch on the weekends, and just feel in it again. Yeah. The substantiality of what I made here is more than sort of what I've been able to make back in Brooklyn. Context is everything. So many things want to resist each other at so many different times, but if you create the right environment and nurture the right relationship, they can be joined. And is that, can you do that without forcing it? Is that forcing it? It brings up all these questions that I think permeate through life and through going through our environment, and how much power do we have, but also how much do we want to exert and restrain. And something is always made after the fact, whether I like it or not, whether I thought what I did was wrong or not. It's there is something.